Today we're going to think about creating results chains or roadmaps, and this process is really about checking our thinking. This Adaptive Management for Conservation training program is supported by UNDP with GEF financing. It's delivered by Conservation Management and Community Solutions in partnerships with the Blue Mountains World Heritage Institute. The source material is used under a Creative Commons licensing based on original materials developed by the Conservation Measures Partnership and Protected Area Solutions. So in terms of our conservation standards process, we're now firmly into plan. And some of the things we're really looking at carefully today, we've got some goals, we've got our strategies, we're really thinking about assumptions and starting to think about objectives as well. Recapping where we're up to, we've established our project area and vision, where we're working and why. We've identified our targets, so what's important to look after. We've said how we'll know our targets are healthy and how healthy they are. We've spent some time thinking about goals that relate to healthy targets. We've identified what the threats are and which ones are the most important. We've made a diagram to look at who's influencing our targets and our threats, and we've put that together as a diagram to give us all the information we need to make a good plan. We've also identified our priority strategies, and we do this results chain step so that we can link those strategies and actions to the outcomes we want or the goals we want. This really helps us be confident that the strategies we've chosen will get the result we want in the end. A results chain is a simple tool that just helps us clarify the assumptions we make about how the strategy will contribute to reducing threats and achieving the conservation goal. We can think about it a bit like planning for a journey. If we're in Darwin and we want to get to Jabiru, we know we need to get to South Alligator before we get to Jabiru. We need to get to Bark Hut before we get to South Alligator. Corroboree needs to come before Bark Hut, and Humpty Doo is directly after Darwin. So we can see all the places we need to be in order to get from Darwin to Jabiru. We can then start thinking about when we need to get there. If we need to be in Jabiru by 5 p.m, when do we need to be in all the other places? So what does that mean for when we need to start? By doing this, we can then start thinking about what are the activities that are needed for each step. So when we're in Darwin, we need to get the vehicle, get the fuel, drive for an hour. We drive for another hour. We drive for an hour. We might by this stage need an ice cream so that we can keep going. Drive for an hour, drive for an hour. So we've really got the results on one side and the activities on the other. Results chains really help test our assumptions. If we have a strategy around education, what are the things we're assuming that mean undertaking the educational program will lead to improved outcomes for a particular species, for example? So the basic components of a results chain are the strategy we've selected, the goal related to the target, then we need a result related to the threat or a threat objective. Then what we're filling in is really the results needed along the way. And we often, here's a simple example. To design strategies and actions that are most likely to be effective, we need a logical process. So, in this example, there's evidence that no-take zones can restore fish populations, both within these zones and in the vicinity. So we've got our strategy and our goal. But this will work only if some assumptions are true. These need to be written down and checked. So here we have our strategy and our goal. And we've said, in order to move from establishing no-take zones, the community needs to accept and support no-take zones. If the community accept and support no-take zones, then fishing pressure is removed for a sufficient period for fish to breed. If fishing pressure is removed and fish can breed, then we'll have higher populations of big fish. If we've got higher populations of the big fish in the no-take zone, then we'll have an increased community fish catch. This process helps us see that the strategy can achieve the goal. But we might also have some other assumptions. So we might need to know that outsiders are not exploiting the no-take zone. We might also need to know that fishing pressure outside the no-take zone is sustainable. So good results chains. They're results oriented. The boxes contain desired results, e.g. reduction of hunting, and not activities, e.g. conduct a study. They need to be connected in what we call a causal manner, so there are clear connections. A good way to test this is using if-then statements between each pair of boxes. We also need to demonstrate the changes, so each box should describe how you hope the relevant factor will change, e.g. increase or decrease. The other thing we need to see for good results chains is that they're relatively complete, and then the flip side of that is that they're simple. So we need sufficient boxes to make logical connections, but not so many that the chain becomes really complex. Another way of ensuring your results chain is simple is making sure you have only one result per box. What do we mean by results chains not being an activity or implementation flow? In the top diagram here, you can see we've got a media campaign on one end and a healthy fish population on the other. If we use the if-then process for looking to see whether it's logical, we can say, if we run a media campaign, then we will identify the target audience. If we identify a target audience, then we will produce education materials. Is that true? Not necessarily. You might identify a target audience, but that doesn't mean you will produce materials. Probably the clearest thing that shows you this is an activity chain is if you try and say, if we monitor and evaluate the effectiveness, then there will be a healthy sturgeon population. So monitoring and evaluation is not something that tells you if you've got a healthy population. Let's have a look at something that's more like a results chain. So if we have a media campaign, then the campaign will reach the target audience. If the campaign reaches the target audience, the demand for caviar or fish eggs will drop. If the demand for caviar drops, the price for caviar will drop. If the price drops, then the sturgeon will not be overfished. If the sturgeon are not overfished, then we will have a healthy sturgeon population. So here's an example where I'll get you just to think about the if-then logic. In this case, we're looking at protecting mountain forests through the promotion of certified timber harvesting. This chain at the moment says if loggers are knowledgeable about certification, then loggers will use certified harvesting methods. If loggers use certified harvesting methods, then there'll be more sustainable harvesting of timber. But does knowing about certification mean people will believe it's profitable. Perhaps we need another result in this chain. Chains don't have to be just one box to the next box. Sometimes you need two things to move to the next step. So in this case, loggers need to be knowledgeable about certification and they need to believe it's profitable. If they're knowledgeable and believe it's profitable, then they will use it. Let's look at another example. This is a real project from South America, and the project team had worked in another country using a same results chain. So this project team assumed here, if we train local fishermen as fly fishing guides and we give them fly fishing gear, they'll have the skills and gear to be guides. If they have the skills and gear, then they'll work as guides. If they're able to work as guides, they'll increase their income. If they've got increased income, they'll not need to fish so much, so there'll be less unsustainable fishing practices. If there's less unsustainable fishing, then the coral reef ecosystem will be more conserved. But when they did their evaluation, what else did they find they needed? Well, what they needed was clients. Tourism and tour operators needed to know about the guides, so that then the tourists would hire the guides. The other things they found was that they also needed English speaking skills. In the first project where they'd used this strategy, people there spoke English. In this project, people largely spoke Spanish. So they realised they also needed to make sure that people could not only had the skills to help people catch fish, they also needed the English speaking skills. What we can also do on results chains is put some objectives there. This helps make your broad strategy more specific. So if you have a strategy which is about establishing sustainable hunting, you might actually think about what your objective is. It might be something like return to sustainable hunting practice by 2022. Our results chain should help us think through whether the proposed strategy and the objectives will be sufficient to reach our goal, which in this case is that the number of tree kangaroos will be 25% more than in 2020. Let's look at an example from one of your Papua New Guinea SMIs, the Lake Katubu case study. In this case, if we're looking at protecting the endemic fish and we're looking at reducing unsustainable fishing, one option is to actually look at enforcement of rules. Here we can see if rangers are well trained, then fishing rules will be enforced. If fishing rules will be enforced, then there will be more sustainable fishing. However, some other things might be needed in order to make sure the fishing zones are enforced. One thing identified in the situation analysis is that fishing zones need to be agreed. This means that customary owners, the mining company and settlers might all need to be much more aware of fish values. So if they're aware of fish values, fishing zones or fishing sites can be agreed. If fishing sites are agreed and rangers are well trained, then fishing zones can be enforced. But if we think about this, one of the other key reasons that there was unsustainable fishing was not just around enforcement. It was around the need for people to actually secure food. So we may also need to think about how do we get alternative food sources secured in order to get more sustainable fishing. So if we look at our chain, we may well add another box which says cooperative solutions for food supply are identified. Now you can start to see how these two different strategies, enforcement of the rules and work with mining companies to reduce impacts, link together. In terms of this case study, we can then build on this chain after we've addressed our first threat, which was unsustainable fishing. As we realised there was another major threat, which was tilapia in the lake. So we had a strategy identified, which was to reduce the invasive species in the waterways. And the first step might be that an agreed plan is in place to reduce invasive species. One of the things we need to do now is to think through what are the things that are required between having a plan and reducing tilapia in the lake. If we want to think more about what we're doing in order to get these endemic fish into a better state, the other thing that's been identified is the need for a finance strategy. And this potentially comes in where we need to get enforcement, but also in terms of thinking about finance for alternative food sources. So this results chain now can help you see how each of the strategies needs to interact to achieve the ultimate goal of looking after the endemic fish. Doing all this work can really help you put together a story that helps people understand how the actions they're doing are going to lead to the results in the end, and really think through whether at each stage they're actually achieving the results they want. So in this case, if we light fires to burn the country, the grass is going to rejuvenate. If the grass rejuvenates, all the animals will come back to that burnt patch. If the animals come back, animals like the hill kangaroo and wallabies will be back in the area. If hill kangaroo and rock wallabies are back in the area, old people that go out hunting will feel happy again. The results chain is really just a way of us helping think through what's the story? What's the story that we want to happen? And what are all the things we need to have in place to make that story come true?